say so many things like tonight.
Good.
I'm going to tell you which underwear I am wearing.
Please.
You know, you never finished, and you're only as good as your last collection. I mean, in the last year, I've had a comeback, I've been finished, I've come back again.
I blossomed, and everybody said, oh, I was an overnight sensation. And I said, that was true, except my overnight took 72 years.
You know what? My shrink is 90. He's 90 years old. And I think when I finish with him, I think I'm going to just come straight
to me
you.
instead of guys.
Because she knows more about my life.
It's all mental. It's all mental. If you think, oh my gosh, I'm going to be so hungover tomorrow, I can't do this, you know what I mean? You know, it's going to kill you.
They think they know everything, and they know nothing.
And so it was his birthday, and I didn't know what to give him. And so I said, okay, if you want, I marry you.
Because never, ever in the history of time, there have been a woman as in control of her destiny as a woman today.
I love to empower women and I want to make a woman feel like the best version of herself. That's why I do what I do.
Make it rain, girl, make it rain. 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 Make it rain, girl, make it rain.
Thank you all so much, and thank you for coming out in this miserable weather, but it's going to be worth it. Christy Turlington Burns is more than a model. She's a model citizen, an activist, and an advocate. She is the model for doing good and for supporting causes that matter, from mothers to animals, to healthy living and social responsibility. Christy emanates love. Designer and fashion icon Marc Jacobs once said of her, "The thing with Christy is that there's not one negative thing you can say about her. And it's not because you choose not to, there just isn't one." She is one of a handful of personalities you can call by only her first name and expect everyone to know exactly who you're talking about. She's a businesswoman, a filmmaker, an author, a yogi, a marathoner, an equestrian, in addition to being a devoted wife and mother. Christy is a groundbreaker. She secured the first of its kind coveted beauty campaign with Maybelline. She became the face of Calvin Klein's eternity in one of the longest exclusive contracts in fashion history. She was the model for the mannequins at the Met Costume Institute's annual exhibit, the cultural phenomena we now know as the Met Gala. Former Met curator Harold Coda christened Christy as the face of the 20th century. And all this before social media dictated who and what matters. Christy retired from runway modeling at the ripe age of 26 and is busier than ever. She just returned from one of her many humanitarian missions with her foundation, Every Mother Counts. She's on a tour for her latest book, Arrival Stories, co-curated by Oscar host Amy Schumer. I can only imagine how much fun they had putting this book together. This must-have book is available here tonight after our talk, and Christy has signed the books, so get your credit card ready, and there's a table out front where you came in. I, for one, cannot wait to hear what she has next on her agenda. Ladies and gentlemen, let's welcome the woman rightly called the nicest supermodel on the planet, Christy Turlington Burns. And we didn't plan this. We didn't discuss our outfits. That we're very black and white tonight. But it works.
It works.
Okay. So I always start at the very beginning. You were born Christy Nicole Turlington on January 2nd, 1969. How old does that make you?
53.
Proud 53.
Yeah, absolutely.
You're a Capricorn.
Mm-hmm.
Are you a believer in astrology?
Yes, I'm a proud Capricorn too.
Well, we like proud everything. Some of Capricorn's positive traits are ambitious, determined, patient. Negative traits, cynical, stubborn, procrastinator. Which of these do you agree with?
Oh gosh, stubborn, definitely.
Stubborn works?
No, I think they all do, actually. Maybe not procrastinator. I'm not really a procrastinator.
Well, you couldn't have gotten everything done that you do, actually, if you procrastinated. Okay, some famous Capricorns include Michelle Obama, Diane Keaton, and Betty White. What are your thoughts about that?
Good company, right? My sister as well.
Excellent company. Okay, back to you. You were born in Walnut Creek, an East Bay suburb of Northern California, to Dwayne and Elizabeth Turlington. How did your parents meet?
My parents met on a flight to Honolulu from San Francisco. My mother was a flight attendant for Pan American Airlines, and my dad was not quite a pilot yet, or not a commercial pilot yet. He was just a passenger on a flight. They met, they flirted, they exchanged information, and they dated when they got back to California, and fell in love and got married.
Your mother led a glamorous life as a flight attendant. How was her life as a flight attendant similar to yours as a model?
I would say that flight attendants in the 60s were probably the closest comparison in a way to models in the 80s. I think it was one of the few careers that allowed a young woman to travel the world and get to know the rest of the globe. She had a lot of independence, and I think really became who she was because of those experiences traveling around the world, very much like I did in my early years in the 80s.
And way back then, stewardesses always had to be thin and pretty, and it was like selecting models.
That's true. They had height and weight requirements. You weren't allowed to be pregnant and be a flight attendant. I think my mom had one flight with Kelly whilst pregnant before she had to stop flying. And then there was not really the possibility to come back once you were a mother.
And she was from El Salvador?
Yes, my mother was born in San Salvador. She came to the United States, to Los Angeles, when she was about 8 years old, in the late 40s.
Okay, Kate Moss's father was also a pilot. Did you ever bond over that?
I don't think he was a pilot, but he did work for Pan Am, and we would laugh about it all the time because we knew all of the rules around flying, especially as a, as a family member of someone who worked for the airlines. You got a lot of great benefits that we could fly for free as long as we were in school, but we also had these very strict dress codes. So if you were a family member, you couldn't show up on a plane and wear jeans or shorts or anything like that. We had to wear nylons and a dress. And we had to look the part. We had to be professional and responsible.
There was a good time when people used to dress up to go on planes.
True.
Long time ago.
I miss it.
Our mutual friend who's here in the audience, fashion icon Arthur Elgore, said you are his favorite model because you fly well. And when you get to a location, you're always ready to work.
I think I do fly well, and we have gone all over the world together. We've had the most incredible adventures together, shooting from Africa to, New Orleans, and we just had such a blast together.
And he said you always got good seats because you knew everyone at Pan Am. Anyone in the audience remember Pan Am? Okay. Okay, you have two sisters, Kelly and Erin, and Kelly is here. I have two sisters also. What was it like growing up in a house full of women?
It was great. We're all sort of within about 3 years of each other, so very close in age. Kelly's our big sister, so she was the boss. Erin and I grew up sharing a room together for most of our childhoods.
So you the middle child?
I'm the middle child.
Same here.
All right.
And what do your sisters do today?
My sister has an amazing travel blog called Kel's Travel. She was a travel agent for a short time, but she's been living in New York for, I guess, about 10 years now. 12, oh my gosh. So she's my neighbor in Tribeca. We get to see each other quite a lot, and she's also married to my husband's brother.
That's interesting.
Always gets a good reaction.
So there's two Turlington Burnses in the family.
Exactly.
Okay. At 14, your family moved to Miami, where one day you and Kelly were out riding horses. Can you share what happened next?
Yes, we actually moved to Miami in 1979, so I was about 10, and lived there for 4 years because Pan Am had their headquarters in Miami at the time. So we moved for my dad's job. And Kelly and I grew up riding in Northern California, and then when we moved to Florida, part of the deal was my dad allowing us to continue to ride. It was a bit of an incentive for us. So Kelly and I would ride most every day after school to train with our horses for competing sometimes on weekends. And one afternoon we were there with our mom, and there was a photographer who, in between shots of whatever he was doing, would kind of come up and watch us in our lessons. And at the end of our lesson, he came up to my mom and said, I'd really like to take photos of your daughters. Would you be okay with that? And Kelly was like, yes, absolutely. And I was a little bit, I would say, more shy and also not really very fashion aware at the time. It's like a mouthful of braces and kind of a bit of a nerd, I would say. So we got to take pictures with this guy, and then he sent them to a local agent in Florida who we met with, and she said, yeah, let's do this. You can work. So I started working after school mostly for local newspapers, mostly doing like juniors ads, which age appropriate, and then soon after that started to be in like the jewelry ads and the cosmetic ads for the paper. And then we moved back to California when I was 14, and I went to Paris when I was 15.
Okay, yeah. So and one of your first modeling jobs down there was for Burdine's department store.
Exactly.
What was that like?
It was great. So the studio was in the department store itself. So my mom would pick me up from school, and we would drive downtown Miami. And usually, I'd shoot for maybe an hour or two, not very long. But you kind of go through the middle of the department store to the back of the house, and there would be a small studio. And sometimes I'd get to see some New York models that would come down to Florida for special jobs. But it was really fun. I met some great friends really early on, and I liked the photographers and the hair and makeup people immediately. So it was definitely a fun alternative experience to my junior high school years at that time.
So early on, was Kelly also modeling, both of you?
She was not. She did model and still has modeled even since, but in those first couple of years, no. I was the taller one, I would say. And I think there was a lot more strictness around height back then.
Gotcha. You were then scouted by the top model agency, Ford Models. How did that happen?
So the agency in Miami that I was with was run by a woman named Michelle Pommier, who was a model with the Fords in the 70s here in New York. And through her, I got to meet both a scout from Ford and also a scout from Karen's, which was the French affiliate. So I was very excited about both of those options. I went to Paris, but then came to New York with Ford and stayed with Ford for a long time.
And at 16, you moved into Eileen Ford's Upper East Side townhouse. You must have some great stories about what life was like living there. Any you care to share?
Sure. These are really fun years, actually. She had a townhouse up on the Upper East Side, East 78th Street, I believe. And it was the most like a dorm experience I've ever had in my life. So there was kind of a revolving door of younger models who were under 18 and young women coming from all over the world. And so I got to meet some fun girls, and we had a lot of fun in New York City in the 80s. We'd sneak out and we'd come back, and I knew kind of all the stairs that creaked, and I knew where the wine was stored, and I knew I would sometimes put my pajamas in the kitchen cupboard so that when I got home, I could change into my pajamas and just pretend that I had woken up for a glass of milk. Sometimes my friends would drop me off and they'd honk to try to get me in trouble, but I never got caught.
Very clever. What were some of the rules Eileen Ford imposed on the models living in the house?
She was pretty strict. I think my parents had some relief knowing that I was going into this career and that there was somebody as strict as Eileen. She was known to be pretty tough. Sometimes she enforced some early morning exercise. which was kind of like Jane Fonda-ish like workouts. She had like a butler and she had like a staff, which was very different from my upbringing. So that was fun. She encouraged like dinner around a big table, and she also would entertain a lot. So she would have parties with photographers and people coming in. So, we would sort of sneak by the party and like peek around and see who was in the room, and that was pretty fun.
Anybody fabulous that you remember peeking at?
I remember seeing who I thought was Steven Meisel, but it was actually Sante Durazio, because they both had long hair. But I sort of saw from the back. I didn't know everybody up close.
And why were you known as CT3 at the agency?
So the Ford agency, they were not very high tech. I don't know if any of the agencies were at that time, but they all of the bookers would sit around a big table, and in the middle of the table it was kind of like a Lazy Susan, and it had these folders with each of our schedules, I guess, inside them. And so I was one of many CT initialed models. Cheryl Teagues was CT1, and I don't know who CT2 was, but I was CT3.
Oh, we have to figure out who
I
CT2 was.
I know.
If anybody
Arthur,
knows
do you know
put
who
it on
CT2?
your card.
Maybe Chris John knows who CT2 was. I don't know.
What models? What models did you look up to early in your career?
So I got to travel to Europe one time with my dad. Well, I guess 2 times with my parents, but one time with my dad on a flight, and we went to London when I was about 12. And I bought my first Vogue magazine on that trip. And the cover was Bonnie Berman, shot by Patrick Demarchier. And so I became obsessed with Bonnie Berman. And then later, once I started modeling, because I didn't really know who anyone was when I had that first cover. But once I got to know Arthur worked a lot with Bonnie Berman. And so I think one of my very first jobs with Arthur, Bonnie was there also, and that was very exciting for me. She was such a beauty, and she was also in school at the time, and I was really impressed by that fact. And I think that's sort of what opened the door that I could one day go back to school and also model.
And did you tell her that when you met her, that you were impressed by her or that you looked up to her?
No, I'm sure I was very, very quiet and didn't say anything. I actually saw her, I've seen her at a few events, like different gallery exhibits of Arthur's photos and things, and she's been there. And I've always been a little bit, I don't know, in awe of her and sort of, I don't know, admired her from a distance. I don't know if
next
she knows
time you
that I'm
see
a
her,
fan.
please say something.
I will.
Give her that.
I will. I don't even know if she lives in New York. Does she live in New York? Yeah. Okay. We need to go out.
Arthur, set up a date for Christy and Bonnie. Okay, you have been. Shelter Island. Okay.
Well, I don't know if he lives there all the time.
Sometimes. Okay, we'll have to.
Shelter Island.
Make that happen.
Can make that happen.
Yeah.
Okay, you've been one of the most popular faces on the cover of Vogue. How did you land your first cover? And the photographer was someone special.
I feel like I could be wrong, but I think the first one was Hero for Italian Vogue. And I was in Rome for the collections, when they would do the collections in Rome and shoot the collections right after. And I shot with Hero for about a week. And yeah, so it was a cover of Italian Vogue with Hero when I was I think I was 16.
And which Vogue cover did you do with Patrick Demarchier?
That was my second one. That was for British Vogue, and that one's one that I really remember so vividly because Donna Karan had just launched her brand under her name, and I'm wearing one of her kind of very first pieces. I have a turban, like a white turban, wrapping my hair up, and this kind of white cross-topped top that she had, and I look so young in it, to be honest, but I felt like such a princess. I felt like I'd arrived.
And what was it like to work with the late, unfortunately, Patrick?
Yeah, still adjusting to that news from last week. You know, he had this studio in Chelsea that he was in, you know, the entire time, from the time that I met him till the last time I worked with him. It changed very little over the years that I knew him. He had this very funny elevator operator in his building that loved to decorate it to the hilt for holidays. So, like, you can imagine. It was Valentine's Day, there was candy, and it was red, and there was all kinds of decor. So that was an experience, and it needed to be operated manually, somewhat like Arthur's studio elevator. But you know, he had also these huge covers of Vogue around the makeup room, and so when you were getting ready, you know, you'd see these covers of Esme, or you'd see, you know, the models that I kind of grew up with, Kelly Emberg and Christy Brinkley, and that whole kind of crew from the 70s, or late 70s, early 80s. So it felt like an important studio to be in.
Was that intimidating to get your makeup done with all those faces around you?
Sometimes, but you know, you just, like, the teams are so important that you work with that do the hair and makeup, that you sort of bond with them, and that's the space where you kind of take over, and it becomes the fun place where you gossip and you know, you tell stories, and you know, and you laugh and you relax. So intimidating initially when you don't know who you're working with, but once you develop those relationships, that's kind of where all the fun is. And we try to linger there as long as we possibly can.
And it's always fun working with Christian when he did your hair.
Always, always. Lots of traveling.
He happily is in the front row tonight.
Yes, I love Christian.
Okay, so after a Vogue cover, the next highest honor in the world of modeling is landing a beauty contract. How did you become the face of Maybelline?
I started working for Calvin first, but I started working for Maybelline when I was about 21 or 22. I signed a contract with them, and at the time, Maybelline was not owned by L'Oreal. They were a company that was from Little Rock, Arkansas. So it was a very American story, and I don't know, the person who was the model for the brand before me was Linda Carter, Wonder Woman.
Oh, wow.
So it was a little bit of a leap in terms of what they were going for, I think. But I worked for them for about 10 years, and then I started my own company for a while, which they didn't love, and L'Oreal acquired them, and so that kind of faded out. And then they came back to me when I was pregnant with my son, and I signed a contract again, and then I worked with them for another 10 years.
Wow. Well, that first contract you did with them was reported to be the largest contract at its time.
Really? I always thought Isabella had the biggest contract for Lancome.
Well, I have a number here.
I can't imagine it's true. It's also, Cindy was with Revlon then. Are you sure? I can't.
Well, this says $800,000 for just 12 days of work. Does that sound about right?
I don't know. I feel like I had to do a lot more work than that. That might have been closer to my Calvin contract early on.
Wow. Well, what did you splurge on when you got that contract?
You know, again, I'm probably a nerd. I used to collect stickly furniture. I was really interested in photography also, so I started to collect some photography. So some like Edward Curtis. I don't know, I went through this phase, and I think that was also quite popular in the 80s. There was a kind of Calvin Klein aesthetic even from the photos that we would do, and so the stickly furniture and this, like, you know, beautiful images, black and white photographs and things. So I started to, that's what I mostly invested in those early years.
Well, let's go to some fashion shows. You and I both met working backstage in the tents in Bryant Park. What was your favorite show from that era? Do you remember something that stands out to you?
Probably, I don't know, I would say either a Todd Oldham show, which were some of the more fun shows in that time. You know, I remember doing a Calvin show after I had kind of stopped doing shows, and then came back for my first show back, and it was in the tents for Calvin, and Calvin had moved from doing these, we talked about this on the phone, a lot of the American designers would do their shows in these kind of showroom type of, well, they were literally the showroom. They were tiny and crowded and fire hazards and not very exciting places to watch a fashion show. So the tents were really, they kind of opened up everything, and it became a little bit more theatrical. Obviously Isaac also, there were some great shows in the tents for him.
I just saw Isaac this weekend and had dinner, and he did say hello to you.
Aww.
If I had $1 for every time somebody in the last few years asked me to bring back the tents in Bryant Park, I'd be rich.
Will you bring them back? Will they come back?
Never.
Never.
Can't go back. Okay, so let's go back now to 1988. You signed an exclusive contract with Calvin Klein, And as you already mentioned, it became one of the longest running exclusive contracts in modeling history. What excited you most about Calvin's offer?
Well, Calvin was sort of like it at that time. I mean, it was a big deal to do the show, it was a big deal to do the campaign. And so he actually called me one day after going by for a fitting for the shows. And I was in another designer's atelier when my agent called and said, Calvin Klein wants to talk to you. And when I spoke to him on the phone, he said, hey, I was thinking, what are you interested in doing? I was 19, so I was like, I just moved to New York. I was like, I don't really know yet. I'm kind of enjoying doing what I'm doing. And he said, I think I really would love, I'd ask, if I wasn't married already, I think I might ask you to marry me. I'd love for you. He was very, very sweet. And he said, I'd love for you to come and work for me. And so, and he was just about to launch the Eternity fragrance. And so I signed an exclusive contract. So for all categories, from jeans to all the different categories, and did that for a couple of years. And then I would say I had a little bit of a tough time because I sort of suddenly wasn't working with my favorite people like Arthur and Steven, and I was only working with Bruce Weber, who was exclusively shooting for Calvin in those days. And I don't know, we didn't always have like the most chemistry. And so at a certain point, it seemed like, well, I cut my hair, and you had to at the time ask permission, and I got in a little bit of trouble for rebelling and not asking. And so we renegotiated my contract, and I stuck with Eternity for many, many years. In fact, I still work for Eternity now, but the rest of the contract changed. But the next season, I started that show, and so our affection for each other never changed. It just was sort of the end of that kind of era.
It was a very special moment in time, though. Calvin said he picked you because Christy represents quality and intelligence.
Oh, that's so nice.
And Calvin Klein Eternity has become a family affair. You starred in some very passionate campaigns with your husband, Ed Burns. What was it like shooting those campaigns together?
It was very unique. Over the years, I've had many husbands for Calvin Klein's Eternity fragrance. I think I've had about 6. Or maybe I had 5 before my own husband. And so when they came back to me after a little bit of a break, it seemed only right that, that I actually work with my husband. And so we did the first campaign together with Inez and Vinood, who are a couple that shoot together. And Eddie knew them a little bit. So it was a little bit odd because to model with your husband is weird. It's weird to model with any man, or like to pretend like you're in a relationship, but with your husband when you're modeling, but you're a couple. But we brought our kids along to the shoot because it was a holiday weekend, and they thought it was so strange because first of all, I've never really brought them with me to work, and they didn't see their father as a male model or me as even a model. So the whole thing was quite funny. But then we did it again a couple of years ago before COVID, and those were slightly steamier, I would say. And it was fun that time because then we actually realized we actually got a couple of days away, and it wasn't quite a vacation, but it did feel like, a chance to be together away from home.
I'd have to look for those. I'm not picturing those images, but...
Yes, they're always at a beach. So the last ones were in Malibu. The first ones were in Turks and Caicos. So
perfect. Do you have a lifetime supply of Calvin Klein Eternity?
I do. And I noticed the other day, my son recently has a first girlfriend, and I smelled a fragrance on him recently, and I was like, I think that he's gotten into our Calvin Klein Eternity stash.
For many years, it was my favorite fragrance as well.
Really?
A long time, yes. Okay, tell us about how you first met your longtime collaborator and our mutual friend who we've talked to already, and fashion icon, the celebrated photographer Arthur Elgore.
I met Arthur when I was 16 years old. I sort of mentioned that I met a scout from Paris and one from New York. So I went to Paris for one summer, came back through New York just for a few days, and I thought, like, this is where I loved Paris, but I was like, this is where I want to live. So I came back the following summer, and I went to Condé Nast when it was located on Madison Avenue, did all the rounds of the magazines with my portfolio, and I was at Vogue, and the sittings editor, is that what they call them, right? Sittings editor? She looked through my book, and she wrote on the little Vogue stationery, 136 Grand Street, I want you to go right away downtown to see Arthur Elgort. And I ran outside, jumped on the train, got down there, and went to that address. And Arthur was shooting, I think, with CT1, I think, my recollection is. And I sat down, Mariana let me in, and I sat down and I waited patiently, but I was just taking in the whole scene. I mean, he has the most beautiful studio in the industry, hands down, no matter what city you're in, just filled with daylight and massive, and just the music was playing and the ambiance was like just amazing. And in between shots, as the model went to go change, he came over and brought me up to the front of the studio into the light and just started snapping away and chatting with me the whole time. And I was nervous, but he just was so warm and so friendly. And I have a print from that shoot, from that first time that we met, and also the little stationery that says 136 Grand Street, which I'll hold dear forever. And I left. There was a payphone across the street. I called my agent. They're like, you've been booked for a week for American Vogue with Arthur Elgort. And I was like, ah! It was amazing. And that started a 35-plus year relationship that we had.
Did that feel like the moment where you felt like I made it?
Absolutely.
And what is the secret sauce to that relationship, why so many of your best photos are with Arthur?
I guess it's chemistry at the end of the day. I mean, I think trust too. I think, Arthur really always was so kind and so interested in me and what I was doing. I think Christian and Arthur would get a kick out of talking to me about what do we do when we hang out and where do we go, and they just thought I was funny, and I thought they were amazing, and I just got to learn so much in that environment where Arthur was always making documentaries and shooting incredible editorials and covers and campaigns, and there was just so much energy and excitement around, and we all would sit around together to have lunch or sometimes work late and have dinner, and there just was such a feeling of, a family.
Family.
Yeah, really special.
Being around Arthur is very much being around family. In 1989, Arthur was shooting you and Linda Evangelista in your apartment in the police building when he got a call to go to the hospital. Do you remember why?
Oh, actually, I lived around the corner, but it was actually in the studio. It was in the big studio on 136 Grand Street. Yes, that was when Warren Elgort was born. Yeah, so we were shooting French Vogue, and actually, I think it was my shoot. And I think Linda came to visit, and I think she sat down and got made up, and then we got into the clothes, and then we ended up doing the shoot together, and the pictures are fantastic, and we had such a great time. But yes, the call came in, and Greta had gone into labor, and then and so I just remember we brought out cigars, and that became part of the pictures, and then Arthur ran uptown to be there. Hello.
That's a
I don't know if he was early. I hope he was early.
No, I think we had the baby already, but I had to hurry, but I had to go back to the hospital.
Ah.
You had Linda, so I said we gotta go fast.
We had to get through the story.
Okay, so a little change. Arthur said they had the baby, and then he went down, and then he had to come back, and
Okay.
And Greta's not so sure.
She probably knows more than we do. Yeah, exactly. She remembers exactly what happened. But I just remembered I just remember the cigars, and I remember just the feeling of celebration in the studio, and then. Oh, they were wrapped. We just took pictures. Yeah, yeah, and I don't like cigars anyway. Yes.
If you didn't hear that, Arthur got very good pictures of them smoking the cigars.
With
as
wraps.
They worked through lunch, even though they were wrapped.
They were wrapped.
But it looked like they were smoking. Okay. You're an avid collector of photography. Tell us about that collection.
Yeah, I mean, not as active anymore because I feel like you run out of space and it's hard to do, but I do have quite a few images. I have a few Irving pens, some flower still life, some tulips. I also have a beautiful kind of reclining woman from an African tribe, I'm not sure which, from like a studio image that are some of my favorite Irving pen images. I have I have Lee Miller. I'd say I have a lot of nude women photos, black and whites mostly. Those are some of the Edward Westons. And then I have a lot of flowers and still lifes. I have a horse. I have, the pens.
And any pictures of you in the collection?
Yeah, but nothing on my walls of myself.
Okay.
Not in photos. I have a couple of paintings. But they feel a little bit more abstract in a way.
Gotcha. Let's go back to 1989, and you were about to become part of a cultural phenomenon. Herb Ritts assembled 4 top models at his home for a Rolling Stone cover shoot. Stephanie Seymour, Cindy Crawford, Tatjana Patitz, and Naomi Campbell. Cindy told us you were secretly on that set that day, but not in the picture. Why?
I was working for Calvin at the time, so I had my exclusive contract and I wasn't really allowed to do much. I was in California because I was dating someone that lived in California at the time. And so they were shooting not far from where I was living, and I came by just to hang out. I was like, I miss everybody. So we were shooting at Herb's house, and they were doing their photos, and at a certain point Herb just jump in for one. So I jumped in for a little while. If you look at the picture now, you'll see I'm in the back, and it looks like we're all, it looks like we're not wearing anything, but I am anyway. I'm just like, you see my shoulders. And so the picture that was printed in Rolling Stone is just the 4 of them, but the photo that I think has become more well-known is with all 5 of us.
And Calvin was okay with that at some point?
I don't think he knew. I'm sure now he's probably happy that I'm a part of it because it sort of brought him into it a little bit. And
in 1990, Peter Lindbergh shot a British Vogue cover with editor-in-chief Liz Tilberis. It was called The Faces of the 1990s. And that featured you, Naomi, Cindy, Tatjana. What do you remember about that shoot?
That I remember pretty vividly. All of us, we did it in Tribeca, not far from where I live now. So the neighborhood looks quite different now, but we would shoot in that area because the buildings were low and the light was good. And we are all wearing jeans, and then we're wearing Giorgio Santangelo wrap tops. And so I remember sort of everything about it. It's a very clean, I think very modern photo of the 5 of us. I feel like it's come back so much. I mean, I feel like it's so much of my career is also tied to that particular cover. And I think the fact that our grouping has sort of maintained this kind of connection and synergy with one another is in part because of that grouping.
Can you describe each of these girls in one word? Cindy?
Professional.
Tatjana?
Well, she's a nature lover.
Linda?
Serious.
Naomi?
Mercurial.
That works. At different times, Naomi and Linda were your roommates. Tell us what it was like living with Naomi.
Well, I did mention that I had an apartment on the 2nd floor of the building where Arthur's studio is. I rented a smaller apartment. It's like an old warehouse building. So my agent's daughter, Katie Ford, and her husband at the time, Andre Balaz, they bought a floor in that building, and they lived in the front and I lived in the back. And I lived there by myself for a while, but I was never really home. And I met Naomi in London, and I was trying to convince her to come to New York. She was, of course, couldn't wait to get to New York. She was 15 at the time, or 16 maybe at the time. And so when she came, I said, when you come, you can live with me. And so she moved in with me, and we had a really fun but but kind of short-lived roommate experience there until she found her own place and settled herself. But it was great. We didn't have a lot of food in the fridge ever. It was like, you know, I would say some Rolling Rock beer, some ouzo because I'd come home from my first trip to Greece. A lot of clothes between us.
Well, I heard that you both were so close that you helped each other book jobs and get designer samples. Who were some of the favorite designers that you both were?
Well, she was already one of Azzadine's darlings at that time, and she would live with Azzadine when she was in Paris. So when I would go to Paris, she would say, "Come up to my room," and she'd always pick out things for herself, and she'd say, 2 for me, 1 for Christy, 2 for me, 1 for Christy. And so, yeah, I have, as does Greta, we have a very amazing Azzadine collection, and those clothes are so special. He was a very special person. I probably did the same thing for her with Gianni, though. I remember going to an award, I thought it was a CFDA, but I'm not sure if it was, but some awards in the Pierre Hotel in like '88, and Gianni got an award, and so I came with him and his family, his sister and her husband at the time, and when Naomi heard I was going to this dinner and this award, she was like, well, how do I get there and how do I get involved? She didn't come and sit with us, but she found, of course, sure enough, like by that night, she'd found a great table, a date, and there she was. And so then, of course, she got to know Gianni, and then she worked with him and probably became even closer to him than me.
Well, she has said of your friendship, Christy shares her happiness with everyone, even if she didn't share all the clothes with you. Have you met Naomi's new baby?
Yes, I have. She's a beautiful little girl. I've met her a couple of times, but I went out to see her maybe a week or so after she was born.
Nice. She's done a very good job of keeping her out of any public or any
Yes. Yeah, I think it's important to maintain some privacy for family.
Good. Then George Michael cast you in his Freedom 90 music video. It is one of the most talked about music videos in history. What is your favorite behind-the-scenes memory from that shoot?
So that shoot, was a pretty fun story in that I think it came very much about the British Vogue cover that you mentioned that came out in 1990. George was friendly with David Fincher, who was the director of that video, and he was sort of doing a lot of music videos at the time, but he was just hired to do his first big movie. It was Alien 2 or something like that in London. And Herb actually reached out to each of us and said, would you do this video? I think it'd be really great, and I think you all, will have so much fun doing it, and George is so great, and David's so great. And but we all lived in different places, and we all were at our probably busiest at that time, so it wasn't a very easy thing to do logistically, but somehow we ended up happening. I think Linda and I crossed over. Everybody else had their own day on the set. And so Linda, for Linda, because she came the second day, and she had a reputation of being like serious and like don't do her makeup not the way she wants it to be done, or don't mess up with her eyebrows or whatever. So she liked to play up that, and so I told the hair and makeup that she was really like, let's just mess with her a little bit. So we did, I told her to mess with them, and they were terrified, like sweating. But she came in, and of course she was, she has a great sense of humor, and she was a lot of fun, and we had a great time together.
And then you all walked together in Versace's 1991 show, the finale, Lip Syncing to Freedom. The audience went crazy. At what point did you realize how monumental that moment was?
Yeah, I mean, all these things, they weren't sort of like a week later, they were, a season later or something. So it was a little bit, it wasn't like in the moment we realized, I don't think, that it was an iconic moment or thing. For the Versace show, it's 4 of us, but not Tatiana, who was in the Freedom video. And so, because she didn't do as much runway, I don't think, as we did. But it was a fun moment. It was fun to come out together, and it was fun to sing along to the song. And the song had become, of course, a huge hit by then. And so, yeah, it was a really memorable, fun experience.
Great fashion moment. I read that over time, you wanted to distance yourself from the term supermodel. Why?
I don't love the word. I don't know. I guess I I don't know, it just felt sort of sensational during that time. And I think at a certain point, it kind of became synonymous with just the things in the culture that were not great, right? Like just excess and over the top and, you know, big hair and a lot of makeup and flash, you know, just became part of like, I don't know, the stuff that I just didn't like to be associated with. And then of course, whenever there's a big moment in fashion or probably in anything, there's always that like counter moment, right? Let's do everything except that. So I think it just felt heavy, and it felt like, you know, I didn't want to be pigeonholed. I didn't want to be labeled. And I always thought that I would be doing something else. And so I wanted to have the freedom to be able to do other things. And the word kind of, it's been hard because it sticks still. And, you know, I don't know, anybody who knows me well knows, like, I don't identify as a supermodel. That's not something I would say, hey, I'm Christy, I'm a supermodel. No, like, never.
Do you know who I am?
It'd be like, I'm a model. I was a model.
Okay, but there is an upcoming documentary on Apple TV about the iconic time of the supermodels. Can you tell us anything about this project?
Yeah, it's kind of a miracle that it's coming together, I will say. Cindy and Naomi first started talking to each other about this idea and approached Linda and myself about being a part of it. And at the time I thought, you know, this is, sure, I don't know that I can, I've made a few documentaries, so I know how much work goes into them, and I thought, well, I'm not leading this project, so I guess let me know when you get it together, and sure, of course, I'd be happy to participate and support you. Eventually, they got Linda to agree as well, and then there were a few different, you know, directors associated with it, a few different producers associated with it, and finally Naomi said, we're going to go to Imagine Films, and we're going to have a meeting with them. And we had one meeting. They said, we want to do this. They have a deal with Apple, and so they reached out to Apple, and so it's Imagine Films and Apple, and then we were on our way. But of course, this was in 2020, right before COVID. So the good thing about COVID for us and this project was that we had a lot of time to lots of Zooms. I was on Zooms with that group of women pretty steadily all the way through. And, you know, we came out of it able to, you know, we've all done our long interviews, and they've been working on the archival all along. They've just brought on an amazing music supervisor, and Roger Ross Williams is the director now. So it's in great hands, and it will be coming out next year. And
next year we can look forward to it?
Yeah, I don't know exactly the date, but I know it'll be in 2023.
Who's going to tune into that? Okay. Have you talked to Linda since her People magazine interview came out about her botched cosmetic procedure?
We've texted a little bit. I actually spoke to the journalist for the piece. I don't actually know if I was quoted or not, but yeah, we exchanged, I think, right before it happened. She just kind of gave us the heads up that it would be coming out, because I wasn't aware personally of what she had been dealing with and suffering through. So, of course, we're all jumped in to be supportive, and I'm really proud of her that she's been courageous enough to share her story. I think it will be very healing, and I think for a lot of other people who have suffered from similar kinds of, you know, experiences that, you know, make people feel less than, you know, I really hope that she gets better, feels better, and is able to do good with it.
So she's okay, we think?
I think so. And those pictures I thought were great. Our friend Pamela Hansen took the images, I think, for that shoot.
Are there still supermodels today?
I mean, I guess it depends on how you define it, but when people say, oh, you know, I think people get attached to whoever, if they're interested in fashion, they get attached to the models who were of their era in the way that I think you might with a band or a musician. So I think for others today, I mean, I think there's plenty of people that, like my daughter would imagine, she would define as a supermodel. I think Gigi and Kaya and Carly and yeah.
So are those some of the girls you would say you admire today that are working?
Yeah, I mean, I think I guess if one of the definitions is just that people know them by name, or that it's a single name that you don't need to know the last name, then I guess. But also just where, you know, the person, it's not just the brand that you're wearing, it's the person as well who's wearing it. That might also be one of the differentiating characteristics, I guess.
In 1995, you decided to hang up your Manolos and retire from the runway. How did you know it was the right time to step away?
You know, I never loved doing fashion shows, I gotta say. That just wasn't my thing. I don't think I was great at it, to be honest. When I see clips, I have pretty much the same exact, like my arm does the same, like I don't have, there's not a lot of range in my walk. Whereas a lot of my peers, you know, they would just they had a lot of different styles. So I just didn't thrive in it. I think I don't really like to be on a stage, and I am kind of shy in some respects, and so I can be in a smaller group and a more intimate kind of crew doing photos or video or film, but not with an audience. I'm not. You guys are fine. This is about the max. This is about the max size. So I was very happy to leave it. And I think I did my last kind of couture collection in Paris, and I had recently quit smoking. I'd quit many times, but I quit my final time at 25, and I was in Paris and I gained a little bit of weight, and I remember going to Saint Laurent and you know, the clothes didn't fit so well, and it didn't always matter. I never really was that body conscious or that concerned if things were tight some seasons and not so tight. But that year, during couture especially, it felt a little bit different, and I thought, you know what, this is just like not something that I want to endure. Like, I don't need to be here. Why am I here? Like, this isn't that fun. I would like to leave this part of my career on my own terms. You know, it's a big deal when you do shows and like you start the show, or in the day when we had like 10 different outfits in the show, it would be like, my rack is first or my rack is second. That mattered, and when it mattered in the world of that. But at a certain point you're like, do you want to outstay your welcome? And I just felt like, you know what, I've been wanting to go back to school. I've been talking about going back to school. I feel like this is a great moment to do that. So I came back, I applied to NYU, I got in, and I started the next fall.
But to go back to the racks is interesting, because today there's like, nobody changes. So if there's 60 looks, there's 60 models.
Yeah.
The backstages are ridiculous.
Yeah, I've done a couple of shows in the last few years. Randomly, I never thought that I would, but I did a Mark show, I guess in 2019 maybe. And I was like, this is so easy. Maybe I would do it more often. It's like the show, I think, lasted 8 minutes in total, one outfit. I had a comfortable outfit. It was like not a torture, and it was great. And so I was like, yeah, this is so much better in many respects. Probably not easier for everybody else involved, but for me.
Okay, so you did go back to school and enrolled in NYU, but you were also still on billboards all over the city for Calvin Klein and Maybelline. How did the student body react when they saw you in their class?
You know, I never felt anything from the students while I was in class, but I would kind of, like, you know, every beginning of a semester, and you have to kind of go around the room and, well, at least in the smaller classes, and introduce yourself. And I would just kind of like, Mr. Turlington. Like, because my name is kind of unique. There's not a lot of Turlingtons that I've met in the world. And so I would try to keep it on the down low if I could, but it didn't seem like students were that involved, to be honest. I was 26. They're 18, 19. I don't think it was that interesting. And I really didn't look like my Calvin Klein underwear billboards. So I don't think there was like a connection in that sense. But I did actually once do a shoot for Esquire, and one of the writers, I did it like in Washington Square Park, and then one of the writers came with me to a class. And in that class, it was like a psychology class maybe, and they were so mean in the article describing like the professor, you know, they just like sit and sort of watch and observe and take in the room and what was happening, and like observing me in the room, but also observing the professor. And they were so rude about him that somebody obviously must have showed it to him, because at one point, once the thing had come out, he said he like found me in the crowd, and it was like a seminar, so it wasn't like it was easy to find me, and he was like, and by the way, these are not whatever shoes, these are, and I was like, I didn't write it, I did nothing to do with it, I'm so sorry. But that's about as close as the two worlds collided.
Jeez. And you graduated cum laude. So much for dumb models.
I think Cindy said this once to me, it's not that models are dumb, but oftentimes they're uneducated. And maybe that's because we start at, 14, 15. So educated women, educated people are not dumb.
There you go. You went on an adventure to celebrate your graduation. What was that adventure?
I did a few, but one was to go to India. Well, one was to climb Mount Kilimanjaro in Africa. I actually had gone to Tanzania with Arthur on a trip with British Vogue. And when we flew back from that trip, we flew over Kilimanjaro, and you could actually see it. 'Cause sometimes it's quite hard to see from the ground. And I remember thinking, when I come back here, I'm going to climb this mountain. And so I came back, I don't know, maybe 6 years later or 7 years later, and I climbed it. Now I go back to Tanzania quite frequently because.
What was that like, that first climb?
It was amazing. My dad had recently passed. My dad died from lung cancer in 1997. He was a real outdoorsman. And loved to climb, loved to hike, and loved Africa. So doing that hike or that climb was really like kind of a way of mourning him and getting closer to him and kind of getting through that experience. So I felt very accomplished to do it. I did like the hardest possible path because that's just me, the Capricorn part of me, and it was great. It was a big accomplishment.
I'll say. What inspired you to get your master's degree at Columbia University School of Public Health?
I started doing public health advocacy after my dad died, and then eventually when I had my daughter, I had a childbirth complication, so I got interested in maternal health, and I wanted to be the best advocate that I could possibly be, and that really required more education. So I went back to school to study public health to be that, to learn to make relationships, to be able to do some of the things that I'm doing today.
And with that education, you created the nonprofit Every Mother Counts. This has been your priority for the last 18 years. What inspired you to create the organization?
Well, the organization is about 12 years old, but my commitment to working in this field has been since the birth of my daughter, and Grace is 18 now. So 18 years from an experience that a lot of women around the world do endure, but many of them don't survive. And so after my experience, I really had that kind of aha of, what do women do when they don't have access to quality care? What do they do if they don't have access to even basic care, which around the world so many don't. So I didn't know exactly how I was going to make that experience mean something more, but over time, going back to school, I made a documentary film called No Woman, No Cry about maternal health and some of the barriers that women face around the world. And then once the film came out, it felt like the natural next step was to create the organization. So Every Mother Counts is what it's called.
Well, congratulations on what you're doing.
Thank you.
And you just got back from a humanitarian trip to Africa. How have these trips impacted your life?
I mean, I think just from the very beginning, travel has been such an important part of my life, but I've managed to find a way after my modeling career where I was able to travel a lot to be able to incorporate that into my work life too. We have partners all over the world through Every Mother Counts, and so I'm able to get to travel to some of my favorite places in the world. We have partners in India and Bangladesh and Indonesia, Tanzania and Kenya now, Guatemala, Haiti, and all across the United States. So before COVID, I traveled very frequently. I was in India right before lockdown, and then the first thing I could do once we kind of started to see the light at the end of the tunnel was to plan a trip back to Africa. So I just came back in early March.
Okay, so let's talk about your new book, Arrival Stories. You co-curated with Amy Schumer. Any fun stories about working with her?
Well, I got to meet Amy maybe like 4 or 5 years ago before she was a mom, and I was a fan. I think she's hilarious, and we sort of created a relationship where we would text sometimes, and when I learned that she was pregnant, and she was documenting her experience on social media, but also for a film that she was working on, a series, or a documentary series, I think. And so I would reach out and just, words of encouragement, because I work in maternal health, and she was a fan of the work that we were doing at Every Mother Counts, and would share our social messaging a lot. And so I would see her suffering, and I would say, oh, it's gonna get better. It's gonna get better. And she would say, it's not getting better. And it was like not getting better. It was getting worse and worse and worse. And I felt so bad for her, but she had she had hyperemesis, which is not so uncommon, but it's quite uncommon to have it all the way through your pregnancy. So she really suffered all the way till the birth of her son. And then once she was home as a new mom, she called me and she said, I have this great idea. I think we should create there's no anthology, there's no birth story anthology. Like, wouldn't it be so helpful to other women to share our stories? And wouldn't it be great to just kind of open our eyes to what the experience could be, to help better prepare ourselves for such a important role in life, one of the hardest jobs and most wonderful jobs, but one of the hardest jobs that does put our lives at risk to some extent.
Can you tell us some of the people that are in the book?
Yeah. Let's see. I mean, there's Serena Williams. There is a friend of mine, Alicia Montano, who's an Olympian runner. There's kind of the whole spectrum, and there's a few actors. Amber Tamblyn. Why am I blanking? A friend of mine that's an OB-GYN, Amanda Williams. There's about 20, Leslie Feist, musician. There's a really beautiful range of stories that I think feels, I don't think we could ever quite capture the full spectrum of motherhood, but I think it does a really good job covering a lot of the different experiences you can have, from adoptive parents to surrogacy to child loss, which is a really intense experience for women. So I'm really happy with some of the stories. Are really happy, some of them are sad, some of them are just the realness of what it is. So it launched on Tuesday, and it's just really fun and exciting, and the book benefits Every Mother Counts. So
get your credit cards ready. Buy it for somebody in your family or a friend or relative, or keep it for yourself and read it. How has Every Mother Counts responded to the humanitarian crisis in Ukraine?
We gave an emergency grant last week to some partners of ours called Global Response Management. And they're female veterans who are physicians who go into conflict settings. We've been working with them for the work that they do in Matamoros, which is on the Mexico side of the US-Mexico border. A lot of displaced people who don't have health care services. So they kind of go to the places where people don't go. And when I was still in Africa and things started happening in the Ukraine, first of all, it was very top of mind for everyone I was with in Africa. And also a friend of mine is a photojournalist who was covering the Ukraine for the first 5 weeks, Lindsay Adario for the New York Times. So I was in touch with her, and trying to figure out what's the best way. And sometimes when there's a humanitarian crisis that's to this extent, there's just a lot of chaos. And so I've learned over the time that we've had an emergency fund that, letting our partners who are familiar with what's happening on the ground, letting them do their needs assessment, and then letting them kind of lead what's needed. I think most of us saw the stories about hospitals with pregnant women and infants being targeted. And so, our issue being around childbirth and trauma, I think very much linked. And so that's our first thing that we'll do. But I know that things are, like a lot of crises do, they have many phases. And so we're already kind of identifying other organizations on the Poland side of the border to be able to support more very specific maternal health care types of initiatives.
Well, bravo to you. Absolutely.
Thank
you. Okay, so now let's get back to your very hot husband. The actor and filmmaker Ed Burns, or Eddie as you call him. Was it love at first sight?
I think in retrospect it might have been, but I was actually in a relationship when I first saw him, so I don't know if I could have said love. I wasn't in a space for that. But we first saw each other rather at a Knicks game, a Knicks Golden State game. And so Golden State was my California team, and Eddie is a die-hard Knicks fan. And we weren't sitting together, but we kind of passed each other, and I was with a girlfriend who was like, oh, there's that cute actor. His first movie had just come out. And then we didn't meet for another few years. And actually my sister is a big reason of why we met. She had a girlfriend who worked with a very dear friend of Eddie's. Eddie had been a PA for Entertainment Tonight for a while. And when I was breaking up with the person I was with when I first saw Eddie, but it was really dragging out. It's a painful ending. My sister kept saying, well, what about Eddie? What about Ed Burns? And he had said somewhere after he was in the movie Saving Private Ryan, in some interview, like made some comment about having an interest in me. My mom saw that. Oh. So my mom started apparently manifesting. And then my sister had this friend, and then she, somehow we crossed paths at an event, and when we met, I was so kind of embarrassed because I knew all this stuff was happening behind the scenes. But we met and we hung out, and then we stayed in touch, and then we started dating a month later, and then got engaged 5 months later, and we've been together for about 23 years almost.
Amazing. Describe Ed in 3 words.
That's so hard. I would say patient. I would say hardworking. And I would say, I mean, he's like a great partner. He's like my perfect balance.
All right, we'll let you use that as a 3rd word.
Balance partner.
Ed told me that you have amazing comedic timing and should be on Saturday Night Live. Is hosting SNL a dream of yours?
Well, again, the audience part would scare me too much, but the people I think that I'm closest to see my sillier side, I would say. My sister's one of the people that laughs at my jokes the most. When I first met Eddie, he would be like, I'm funny. He'd say that about himself, and I'd say, well, I'm funnier. And I think I'm funnier. But yeah, I don't know if I could actually handle the pressure of being on live television like that and be funny and have lines.
The audience there, I think, is smaller than this when you do it live in the studio.
Yeah, and I guess you do rehearse, and I know I've watched it, but I think I might freeze. I don't know if I have the thing.
I think you pull it off. Okay, September 11th happened, and so you almost did not make it down the aisle. Can you tell us how that affected your relationship?
Yeah, so we got engaged after about 5 months and started planning for a wedding the following fall. And I think we were supposed to get married at the end of September, and obviously 9/11 happened. Well, maybe we were supposed to get married in October, but it was very close to it, and we were going to get married in Italy. And my husband is from an Irish American family from Long Island, Queens. Many of them are they're firemen and cops, and a lot of people were going to be going to this wedding because it was special to have a destination wedding in Italy. But when this all happened, I think Eddie and certainly his brother and some of his family that were actually on the front lines of that event, they just were like, we can't go anywhere. And he was just paralyzed from the experience of being how close it was to us. And he lived in Tribeca, very, very close to the site, and across the street from a firehouse. So all of it was just very real. And I would say on the flip side, a lot of my friends live all over the world. And they live in countries where, sadly, things happen all the time. And I think a lot of people, you kind of go like all the people in the Ukraine getting married right now, right? Sometimes you say, let's seize the day and let's do the things that are sort of life affirming. And sometimes you run away and you just want to shut down. And so I think we had these sort of extreme experiences and canceled the wedding, went on a vacation eventually, and then we were like, I don't know if it's working. And we broke up for about 6 months. But then we got back together, and then we got pregnant with Grace. And Grace was always, our plan was we're gonna get married, and we're gonna have a baby. And Grace stayed on track. Everything else went every different direction, but Grace stayed on track and was right on time.
Tell me about your wedding dress.
My wedding dress is my favorite dress I've ever worn, but it was designed by John Galliano. it was really fun to fly to Paris a few times, not for work, and have him, draw the dress and go for my fittings. And even though I was with child when I eventually married, I wore that same dress. And the style of the dress was kind of like Empire, bust line. And so it was taken out a bit, but I was able to still wear that dress, and it's a beauty.
I'm sure it is. And as your dad had passed away, who had the honor of walking you down the aisle?
That's actually not true. It said everybody thought that Bono walked me down the aisle.
Oh,
he was going to for a minute because he is like one of my closest male friends. But in the end, because I was 34 when I got married, I made the decision that I wasn't being given away, and I wasn't sort of, there's a lot of like not great things connected to like husbandry, and we got married in Catholic church, so I was like, I'm walking myself down the aisle. He walked up to meet me at a certain point, and then we walked to the end together.
Altar, whatever.
Yeah.
Okay, and you did tell us that your sister is also married to Eddie's brother. Who got married first?
We got married first, and we did a lot. Once I met Eddie and we started dating, we did a lot of like fun adventure trips together, and my sister would come along on those trips, and skiing trips and whitewater rafting trips. And Brian is a year apart from Eddie, and they're very close as well, and so Brian was always there too. And my sister was separated from her first husband, and they would flirt, and we thought, oh, isn't that cute? Isn't that so cute that they're so flirty together? And then our wedding is when things took a turn. I think there was a kiss, but we didn't know about that right away. We went on our honeymoon the next day, and we were in Mexico. And I had a rule. I was like, we're not going to call anybody until, we're not going to call anybody. We're just going to have this time to be on our own. And at some point, we had a lot of days of rain, actually. At some point, we were playing backgammon. We didn't know the rules. And he's like, I'm gonna call Brian. And I was like, well, I'm going to call Kelly. And when he called his brother said, oh, your mother-in-law says hello. And he's like, what? Oh, yeah, I'm at Chrissy's mom's house for dinner. I was like, what? So he went to the airport apparently the next day to fly back to New York. And they say a flight has been oversold, and then he'd like to give up their seat. And after this kiss that happened, I suppose, Brian gave up his seat, drove out to the East Bay area, and he and Kelly started to see each other. They got engaged, 2 years later, and married soon after that. And Eddie and Brian have a sister as well, and she has 3 sons, and everybody's very intertwined.
That's great. And your 2 children, Grace and Finn, what are they up to these days?
Grace is she's a senior in high school in her last semester. She just started interning at W Magazine. She just did her first photo shoot for Pop Magazine. Came out a couple of weeks ago. She'll be going to NYU in the fall. Is that everything, Grace? All the things? She's busy. She came with me to Africa. She's repaired an old Rolleiflex camera that I had in a drawer, and she's taking great photos. She's on fire, my little girl.
And she's got the family genes because she's very beautiful as well. So she will have a modeling career?
I guess so. For all the fun and adventure that I had, I've never really encouraged it because, I don't know, in retrospect, it's like 15 and 16, it just seems so young. And when I look back, I just think what needs to be done? What's the hurry? What needs to happen before 18? Can we at least be 18? So she asked me, I don't know, about a year ago. She's like, you're gonna get mad if I tell you this, but I kind of want to try it. I was like, well, I'm not mad. I just, you want to protect your kid, and there's a lot of room for things to go wrong, I guess. And I know we can't protect them for the rest of their days, but you do the best that you can for as long as you can. And I don't know, I'm keeping a close eye. Well, we'll see this first thing happen, and we'll see what happens. But I know that school's important to her. I know that she's worked really hard in school to get the opportunity to have more education. And I know that she's got a lot to explore and a lot to offer. And so I just want it to be her whole self, not just the one side.
And what is Finn up to?
Finn is 16 and he is a sophomore and he loves basketball. Like, he's basketball obsessed. And he was starting to like to act too. I think he actually is interested potentially in acting. Oh, we'll see. He was doing some plays with school before COVID and then that kind of ended, but maybe he'll get into it again. He's got his first girlfriend. I don't know, he's a teenage boy. It's fun. We went to see The Strokes last night, Finn and I, and his girlfriend and her mom. So it's a whole new, I like both of them. I'm like, what's happening? But all of it happening at once.
Well, it makes sense if she becomes a model and Finn becomes an actor. I mean, it keeps the family dynasty going.
Oh gosh.
But there also is some other modeling running in your family. Tell us who that is.
I think you must mean James.
Mhm.
James, that's Kelly's son. He's the oldest of the kids between the three of us. And he started modeling about 3 years ago, I think 3 years ago. James was playing professional baseball. He was playing baseball all through college, which is another similar, like we were saying the flight attendant thing was kind of an equivalent for modeling. I would say what I've learned from his baseball career, there's a lot of similarities in terms of, the grind that goes into that industry. So he was doing that for a while and then he decided he wanted to give it a try. And so James Turlington Carter is modeling.
And he's very hot. He's doing very well. We see his
Fern.
picture a lot. Okay, what has been the best part about being a mother?
I guess it's like the discovery of like self, because you kind of get to see yourself evolve in different ways. You see yourself through their eyes. You want to be your best self for them, to model, your best, highest form of yourself. I also have liked, there at a certain point after traveling to some of the cities that I spent the most time with as a model, I kind of like had a little PTSD from Paris. Like, I didn't love going to Paris, but going to Paris with Grace was like, oh, I get to look at it through her eyes and I get to enjoy, being arm in arm with Grace, walking through the museums and having those kind of fun cafe experiences. So it does kind of allow you to, have a new view on the world, which I've really enjoyed.
Relive those experiences. Mm-hmm. Okay, let's go to some questions from the audience. You are so beautiful. We live in a youth-obsessed culture. How do you feel about beauty and aging?
I mean, I think aging is natural and aging is beautiful. I don't know. My mom has always had a really good sense of self in terms of like where she's at, and I think you do learn that from like who's closest to you. So I never saw any problem or issue with aging. And when I look in the culture, like the people that I see that I find beautiful, they're not younger than me. So I don't know. I wish more of us. I wish culture was more focused on, again, the spectrum of being.
Well, I think you're helping us do that. Did you pick up any hobbies in COVID? Did you bake any banana bread?
No, Grace was our baker, our chef, our organizer. She did a lot of that. Nothing really new. I tried to do some needle pointing. I pretended that I needle pointed, but I really didn't. I thought I would read a lot. I didn't read that much. I worked a lot. I mean, actually, COVID was a really busy time for Every Mother Counts. I think just the lifting of the veil around health disparities, it made our issue even more urgent. And so it was a really busy time. I'm not a big phone person or Zoom person, but I have had to adapt like the rest of us. And so I still spend like, 10 plus hours a day doing that work. And so that's kind of what I did most of the time.
Kept you busy.
Yeah.
All right, one last question. What do you remember about becoming the Met's mannequin?
Yeah, that was a cool honor. I got to sit for an artist who made the faces for the mannequins. And so he sculpted it from, I sort of stood there in a I'd never had anyone sculpt me before, so that was kind of a cool experience for Pucci mannequins. They designed the mannequins. And then the exhibit was 100 years in fashion, and so they were, the show was kind of like fashion from like 1900s or before that on. And so it was kind of interesting to see them do variations of me. It was my face for the males as well. It was my face for the children. It was like a variation of my face, but that was a little bit weird. And then Orbe did the hair for it, and he did all this kind of raffia sort of hair. And I got to, spend time with Harold Coda, and I got to see just the way that they care for the clothes that they have in the archives there. And it was just cool to have that kind of behind the scenes.
It's extraordinary
experience.
how those collections are kept and maintained. Okay. We have another last surprise. Someone in the audience will receive an autographed copy of Christy's book, Arrival Stories. Look under your seat, and if there isn't chewing gum there, see if you have the envelope and raise your hand.
Oh, it's over there. Is it there?
No. Nobody?
It's like an Easter egg hunt.
All right. Must be under a seat that's empty. Sorry about that. Okay. Well, you'll have to get your book outside.
Whoever gets it the fastest.
The rest of you will get it outside, but she has signed them. And I have one last and very final question. What advice? Oh, we found. Oh.
All right.
Okay. Okay. You see the gentleman in the back, and we'll take care of it. Okay. The last question. What advice do you have for the next generation of models that may be in the audience?
I don't know. I mean, I don't know what I would tell a model. I guess I would tell them to go to school, like do something else. Don't, continue to grow and to evolve. I mean, Arthur would tell me, go take a dance class. I didn't do it. I'm a little clumsy. But he would say, take a class, like do the things that are gonna enrich your life, and those are only gonna make you more interesting and have more to offer. Even when you are in this sort of one-dimensional kind of plane, there's just more going on, and there's more behind your eyes, and there's more that you can kind of convey and emote. And so yeah, keep yourself engaged.
Well, I think that's excellent advice. Thank you. Christian, do you have something to say? Right?
It is not the most comfortable question, but it follows the last question, and it is something that I think Cindy is uniquely placed to address if she feels like it. The question of the predator situation that developed in the last 20 years in our business compared to the 20 years that came before, where we all started.
Yeah.
Christian's asking about the predator. Did you feel comfortable talking about that?
Yeah, I don't mind. I mean, it is ironic. The French agent that ran the agency that I first met with is the guy that killed himself in prison in Paris a couple of months ago, Jean-Luc Brunel. So I didn't experience that predatory sort of thing from him, but it was around. Like, there's just certain environments that just didn't feel particularly safe. I remember getting off planes in Milan and having, some old guy pick me up. And again, nothing happened, but the likelihood, or, I think you read stories about Uber drivers that take a girl off, it's like there was so many opportunities for that kind of thing to happen. We didn't have our cell phones. We didn't have an ability to make a call if we didn't feel okay. I mean, Shalom shared with me recently, I'd forgotten completely, but she got kind of pulled from behind a fashion show by another designer's team, but to bring her to another fitting. But she was 15. She didn't know. She couldn't make a call. And so just that's not all predatory, but there are different kinds of things that are just kind of taking advantage of the innocence of certain people. And just the whole thing has just gotten so big. The industry got so big. everybody wanting to capitalize on it. And when you see this kind of, when you would go to the shows, and maybe that's part of why I didn't like them, you just see how many people were like lingering around that didn't really have a role to be there, but they're backstage and we're naked. Like, why is that? Why do they have to be in this space? You just felt exposed and exploited sometimes. And I don't really know whose job it is. I think that it's an agent's responsibility for the younger models in particular, but also the parents should be there. My mom was with me for a while, until I could get rid of her. I was like, I'm fine. But for a while she was, and I think when I look back at my own experience and why things were different, like the people I worked with, and they saw that I had someone who cared about me, and they saw that that I had some sense of self and that I had some confidence that came with having somebody that cared about me. And, there are a lot of models that's not the case. They're being, brought in from Russia, from all over the world. And there's a very similar element to what happens in human trafficking, an uncomfortable similarity on the worst side of it. And I just didn't experience that with the folks that I came into the industry with. Not the core people, not my friends, not the people in New York. And I think part of that was because I was doing it with the highest level of teams, and it just didn't happen.
Well, I think the industry is trying to address it in the agencies, and the models now, I believe, have to be 18. Mm-hmm. And there are lots of people watching and trying to prevent that from happening. But let's end on a high note and say thank you, Christy. This has been a pleasure to have you here.